The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a place where truth was supposed to stand tall. But as Colonel Daniel Hayes sat at the defense table, the air itself felt heavy with mockery and disbelief. He was a man once celebrated, his chest once shining with medals that told stories of courage, brotherhood, and sacrifice. Now, those same medals were tucked carefully inside a small case beside him, as if they too were ashamed to be seen in this place. His uniform no longer fit him the same. The weight of the years and of betrayal hung on his shoulders. Across the room sat Ethan Miller, the son of a wealthy businessman, wearing an expensive suit and a smug grin. Daniel's hands tightened around the edge of the table as he remembered that night, the insults, the laughter, the disrespect, toward a fallen comrade. He had only pushed the young man away when the situation turned ugly, but money and influence could twist truth as easily as paper in the wind. Judge Morrison entered with the swagger of a man who had never known fear, loss, or war. His black robe flowed like arrogance personified. He settled into his seat and glanced at Daniel with a smirk. "So," he began, tapping his gavel lazily, "this is our so-called hero, the man who claims to have served his country." Daniel rose slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. I served 22 years in the U.S. Army. I was decorated for—" "Oh, please," the judge interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "Decorated. Everyone claims to be a hero these days. Tell me, Colonel, or should I say former Colonel, are those medals real, or did you buy them online to impress people?" The words hit harder than any bullet Daniel had faced. The courtroom rippled with laughter. Even the prosecutor allowed himself a small grin. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he refused to bow his head. "Every medal I earned was bought with blood," he said quietly, "not money." Judge Morrison leaned back, pretending to inspect him like a fraud on display. "Blood, you say? Well, perhaps you should spend that energy learning to control your temper instead of attacking innocent citizens." Innocent Daniel's voice cracked with restrained fury. "That man spat on a picture of my friend who died in Afghanistan. He called him a coward. Would you have done nothing? Order," the judge snapped, slamming his gavel. "This court doesn't care about your sob stories, soldier. This is about facts, not fairy tales of heroism." Daniel's lawyer, a nervous public defender, tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Please, don't make it worse." But the damage was done. Every whisper, every glance in that room told Daniel that his years of service meant nothing here. The medals that once symbolized honor now seemed like decorations on a ghost. As the judge called for recess, Daniel remained standing. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the deep, unbearable ache of humiliation. He gathered his medals and held them close for a moment. "They'll never understand," he murmured to himself. The laughter still echoed in his ears as he walked out of the courtroom, his heart heavy, his pride shattered, unaware that fate was already setting the stage for a reckoning no one would forget. That night, Daniel sat alone in his small apartment on the outskirts of town. The dim light from a single lamp flickered over the medals spread across his table. Each one glimmered faintly, not with pride, but with memory. The Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Distinguished Service Medal each carried a story that no courtroom laughter could erase. He traced a trembling finger over one ribbon, and the world around him faded into the roar of gunfire and sandstorms. The battlefield returned in flashes, the burning desert sky, the smell of smoke, and the pounding of his heart as he dragged a wounded soldier through a hail of bullets. He heard Sergeant Cole's voice again, hoarse but brave. "Go, Dan, leave me, not a chance." Daniel had shouted back, hauling him toward safety. But a mortar struck nearby, and when the dust cleared, Cole was gone. Daniel swallowed hard, pulling himself back to the present. The sound of distant traffic replaced the echoes of war, but the pain remained. He had carried those ghosts for years, and now a Judge S. words had cut deeper than any wound. He picked up a framed photograph from the shelf, a younger version of himself and his squad, smiling, arms over shoulders, dust on their uniforms but pride in their eyes. 7 men, only 3 made it home. "Cole," he whispered, "I promised you I'd keep your name clean. I didn't think I'd have to fight for it here." His phone buzzed on the table, another news alert. Local veteran faces assault charges, judge questions authenticity of medals. Below it, hundreds of cruel comments. Another fake hero exposed? Probably PTSD and guilt. Liar trying to play the soldier card. Daniel's eyes burned, not from anger alone, but from the helplessness of seeing his entire life reduced to ridicule. The town that once clapped when he walked in parades, now looked at him like a fraud. The small grocery store where he shopped every week now had whispers following him down the aisle. But beneath the pain, something old stirred, the same quiet defiance that had kept him alive in war. He had survived worse. He would survive this too. The next morning, Daniel rose early. He dressed in his formal uniform, polished the medals until they shone again, and pinned them back onto his chest. Not for show, but as a silent declaration, "I am still who I was." He stood before the mirror and saw the exhaustion, the lines, the scars, but behind them, he saw the soldier again, the man who never surrendered. When he stepped outside, a cold wind cut across his face. Neighbors stared as he walked toward the courthouse once more, whispers following him like shadows. He didn't care. As he passed the flagpole in front of City Hall, he stopped for a moment, saluting the stars and stripes fluttering in the wind. "They can mock me," he said under his breath, "but they'll never mock the men who gave everything." Somewhere deep inside, he felt the faint stir of destiny. He didn't know that tomorrow, when he walked into that courtroom again, everything would change, and justice would finally have a voice strong enough to silence every doubt. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed like a hive of restless gossip. Reporters lined the back rows, ready to feast on the scandal. The story of the fake medal veteran had spread far and wide overnight. Even the clerk who once greeted Daniel with respect now avoided his eyes. Daniel sat silently at the defense table, his medals once again pinned to his chest, not as proof, but as defiance. Every click of a camera, every whisper, was a test of his patience. His lawyer whispered, "We could plead for leniency, Colonel, it might help." Daniel shook his head. "I won't plead for mercy when I did nothing wrong." At precisely 10 o'clock, Judge Morrison entered. His smug grin returned, that same cruel twist of arrogance. "Back again, Colonel," he said. "Still carrying those ornaments. I see you shined them, perhaps hoping the glare will blind the court from the truth." A few people chuckled. Daniel didn't flinch. The judge cleared his throat. "Before we begin, let me make something clear. This court does not tolerate impostors who use fabricated valor to justify violence. It is a dishonor to those who truly served." Daniel's knuckles whitened around the edge of the table. Those who truly served? The words echoed like bullets. The prosecutor began his statement, painting Daniel as unstable, violent, delusional. Each sentence stripped another piece of his dignity. Daniel stared at the floor, jaw tight, fighting the rising storm within. Then the doors burst open. A hush fell over the courtroom as a man stepped inside. His presence filled the room like thunder before a storm. Tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform gleaming with medals and insignia. His hair was silver, his gaze sharp, the unmistakable look of command. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That's General Raymond Carter." "The general?" Judge Morrison blinked, flustered. "Excuse me, sir, this is a closed hearing." "Then open it," General Carter said, his voice low and authoritative, "because I have something the entire town needs to hear." He walked down the aisle, boots echoing with every step. When he reached Daniel's table, he stopped, looking at him for a long, silent moment. Then, without hesitation, he saluted. "Colonel Hayes," the general said, his tone steady and respectful. "It's an honor to stand before the man who saved my unit in Ghazni province. Without him, I and 47 soldiers would be dead." The courtroom erupted in stunned whispers. The judge's face strained of color. General Carter turned toward him. "Judge Morrison, you question this man's medals. I have here," he raised a sealed folder, "classified commendations, declassified by direct order this morning, proof of his service, his wounds, and his heroism. Every medal on his chest was earned in blood and sacrifice." Morrison stammered, I wasn't aware." "No," Carter cut in sharply. "You weren't aware because you never asked. You mocked a soldier who carried the weight of men. You'll never have the courage to command." Daniel said nothing, but his eyes glistened. For the first time, the laughter, the mockery, it all went silent. The truth stood taller than any gavel. Judge Morrison sank back in his chair, trembling slightly. "General, I meant no disrespect." But the general's glare burned through him. "You disrespected every soldier who ever wore that flag on their shoulder, and that will not go unanswered." As the judge looked down in shame, Daniel finally exhaled, not in relief, but in quiet vindication. The war he fought in silence was finally turning in his favor. The silence in the courtroom hung heavy after General Carter's words. For a long moment, no one dared to move, as if the very air was holding its breath. Judge Morrison, who had been so smug and unshakable, now sat frozen, a man stripped of his arrogance and forced to face the truth he had mocked. General Carter placed the folder of documents on the judge's bench. "Read them," he commanded. "Each page holds the record of Colonel Hayes' service, the missions, the rescues, the wounds he endured, so men like you could sit safely behind a desk and pass judgment." Morrison's hand trembled as he opened the file. The official seals, signatures, and commendations stared back at him. Each line shattered his certainty. He glanced at Daniel, no longer seeing a broken veteran, but a soldier who had endured what he could never comprehend. I didn't know," Morrison muttered weakly. Daniel rose slowly, his voice calm but steady. "You didn't want to know. You saw a man in uniform and assumed his honor was for sale. You mocked what those medals meant. They R&T decorations for pride. They re-gravestones for the ones who never came home." The courtroom remained silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, only the soft tremor of emotion spreading through those who watched. General Carter stepped forward again. "Colonel Hayes deserves more than an apology. He deserves justice." Turning to the prosecutor, he said, "Drop the charges immediately." The incident in question was provoked by an act of desecration, a civilian insulting the memory of the fallen. That is not assault. That is restraint. The prosecutor nodded, unable to argue under the weight of authority and truth. "All charges dropped, Your Honor." Morrison swallowed hard. "So ordered," he said quietly, his gavel tapping like a confession. "Colonel Hayes, I save it," Daniel interrupted softly. "Respect can't be ordered by a gavel." The general looked around the courtroom, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "Let this be a reminder," he said, voice echoing through the hall. "Every medal has a story written in blood. Mocking one is mocking the nation itself." As the crowd stood, many in tears, Daniel felt something shift deep inside him, not pride, but peace. Reporters lowered their cameras, ashamed. Even Ethan Miller, the businessman's son, looked down, the smirk gone from his face. The truth had burned through every lie. When the session ended, Daniel and the general walked out together into the cold afternoon air. Outside, people had gathered, veterans, townsfolk, strangers. They stood silently as Daniel passed, and then one by one, they began to salute. Daniel stopped, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest, both the medals, and the memories felt lighter. General Carter placed a hand on his shoulder. "You stood your ground, soldier. That's the courage that never dies." Daniel nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't fighting for myself, sir. I was fighting for the ones who can't anymore." The general smiled faintly. "And you won, Colonel, you won." Daniel turned his eyes to the flag flying high above the courthouse, its colors vivid against the pale sky. He straightened his back, saluted once more, and walked forward, not as a man broken by judgment, but as a soldier reborn through truth. The laughter that once haunted him was gone. In its place rose silence, the kind that only comes when justice has finally spoken.